The night it happened began with a sound that never quite leaves you once you've heard it. The sound of a child crying in a way that means something inside them has cracked. It wasn't loud at first. It was thin, shaking, almost swallowed by the hum of machines and the distant growl of engines. The child stood barefoot on broken concrete, clutching the pieces of a toy that no longer looked like anything at all. His small shoulders trembled as his eyes followed his mother, who lay curled near the factory fence, trying not to move too much because every breath hurt. Oil-stained walls loomed behind them like silent witnesses. Somewhere down the road, motorcycle headlights flickered to life. And that was the moment everything began to change. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that even the hardest-looking people can carry the softest hearts, take a moment right now to like this video, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this only travel as far as people are willing to pass them on. The factory sat on the edge of town like a rusted scar, a place where the air always smelled of metal and burnt rubber. It employed people when it felt like it and discarded them when it didn't. For Maria and her son Lucas, it was both a curse and a lifeline. Maria worked cleaning shifts there, late nights that paid just enough to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Lucas usually waited nearby, sitting on an overturned crate with his favorite toy car, watching the lights and listening to the sounds, pretending the factory was a city and his car was racing through it. That toy had been his father's once, passed down before his father passed away. It was chipped, missing paint, but it was everything to him. That night, a group of men from the factory's private security had been in a bad mood. Orders had come down from above about cutting costs, cracking down on anyone who lingered. Maria had asked for just 5 more minutes so she could finish her section and take her son home safely. The answer came not in words but in force. The shouting echoed off steel walls. Lucas froze, unsure of what was happening, until a boot struck the crate he was sitting on. He fell, his toy skidding across the ground, crushed under a careless heel. When he ran to his mother, he saw her being shoved back, her body hitting the fence hard enough to steal the air from her lungs. The men walked away as if nothing had happened. The factory lights buzzed on, indifferent. Lucas knelt beside his mother, holding her hand, tears dripping onto the concrete. He didn't understand rules or power or cruelty. He only knew that his toy was broken and his mother was hurt, and that the world suddenly felt very unsafe. Across town, in a run-down garage lit by hanging bulbs and the glow of chrome, a group of bikers were finishing up their night. They weren't saints. Life had carved rough edges into all of them. Some had records, some had scars that ran deeper than skin. They called themselves the Iron Serpents, a name that made people cross the street when they saw their patches. But what most people didn't know was that they'd started as a group of men and women who had lost almost everything at one point or another. The garage wasn't just a place for bikes. It was a refuge. One of them, an older rider named Hank, had once worked at that same factory years before. He'd been injured on the job and tossed aside without compensation. The bitterness never fully left him, but it had changed shape over time, turning into something quieter and heavier. When a younger member came rushing in breathless, talking about a woman hurt near the factory and a kid crying in the street, something in Hank tightened. He remembered his own daughter's face the day he couldn't provide for her anymore. Engines roared to life one by one, the sound rolling through the night like distant thunder. They didn't plan much. They didn't need to. Sometimes instinct was enough. The Iron Serpents rode toward the factory, headlights cutting through darkness, leather jackets snapping in the wind. To anyone watching, it might have looked like trouble on the move. But inside those helmets were thoughts of injustice, of lines crossed too many times. Back at the factory fence, Maria was trying to sit up despite the pain screaming through her side. Lucas kept glancing around, half expecting the men to come back. When the first motorcycle appeared, his fear deepened. Then another, and another. Soon the ground vibrated with the presence of machines and bodies that felt larger than life. The bikers dismounted slowly, boots hitting concrete in unison. Workers and guards nearby froze, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. Hank approached the scene with careful steps. He took in the broken toy, the child's scraped knees, the woman struggling to breathe evenly. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stood there, his presence heavy with unspoken history. The other bikers fanned out, not blocking exits, not touching anyone, just being there in a way that demanded attention. Someone called an ambulance. Someone else brought water. Jackets were draped over Maria's shoulders to keep her warm. Lucas watched with wide eyes as one of the bikers knelt and carefully gathered the pieces of his toy, fitting them together as best as possible, treating them like something valuable. For the first time since it happened, Lucas felt his chest loosen just a little. The factory managers arrived, faces tight with forced authority. They spoke of policies and misunderstandings, of trespassing and liability. But their words sounded thin against the low, steady presence of the bikers and the growing crowd of workers who had stopped to watch. People who had been silent for years felt something shift inside them. They saw, maybe for the first time, that they weren't as alone as they'd thought. Maria was taken to the hospital. She had cracked ribs and deep bruises, injuries that would take weeks to heal. Lucas rode in the ambulance with her, clutching his broken toy. One of the bikers followed on his motorcycle all the way to the hospital, staying until they were safely admitted. No one asked him to, he just did. In the days that followed, word spread. Not the kind of word that fades quickly, but the kind that sticks, that gets told in kitchens and break rooms. About how the Iron Serpent stood up to the factory without throwing a punch. About how the security guards involved were suddenly under investigation. About how management was scrambling to control damage they hadn't anticipated. The bikers didn't disappear after that night, they organized. They reached out to worker advocacy groups. They helped Maria file a formal complaint and find legal assistance. They brought groceries to her small apartment and fixed a leaky pipe that had been bothering her for months. One of them, a quiet woman named Rose, spent hours with Lucas, helping him repaint and repair his toy car, turning the cracks into lines of bright color that made it look stronger than before. Lucas started to wait for the sound of motorcycles, not with fear, but with excitement. To him, they became symbols of safety, of people who showed up when it mattered. Maria, still sore and shaken, felt something else grow alongside her pain: hope, not the naive kind but the cautious, earned kind that comes from seeing action instead of promises. The factory eventually settled. Policies changed. Security was restructured. It wasn't a miracle, and it didn't fix everything, but it was a start. Some of the guards were fired. Management issued statements full of apologies that sounded hollow, but behind the scenes they knew they were being watched now. The Iron Serpents had made it clear they weren't going anywhere. Months passed. Maria healed. She found a different job, one that didn't require her to bring her son into dangerous spaces. On Lucas's birthday, the bikers showed up with a small cake and a tiny leather vest just his size, stitched with a simple patch that read "Little Serpent." He wore it proudly, his repaired toy car tucked under his arm. What stayed with people most wasn't the confrontation or the headlines that briefly flickered online. It was the image of hardened riders kneeling beside a crying child. It was the realization that kindness doesn't always come wrapped in softness, and that second chances sometimes arrive on roaring engines. As this story comes to a close, if it has touched your heart in any way, if it made you feel something real, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder of hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. And before the very end, I'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell us what this story meant to you, or share a moment when kindness showed up in your life when you least expected it. Because somewhere out there, another child is crying in the dark, believing the world is cruel and unchangeable. And somewhere else, engines are starting, hearts are turning, and people are choosing to ride toward the pain instead of away from it.